Now, I know many of you may be surprised. We just came off of our gratitude series, and now we're talking about the art of complaining. So here we go. Most of the time we think that complaining feels harmless. It feels normal. Sometimes it even feels like bonding. But here's what most people miss. Complaining is not just venting, it's training. Every time you rehearse what's wrong, your brain learns what to look for next. And over time, that changes how you experience your life. This episode is not about silencing yourself. It's not about pretending things are fine when they're not. And it's definitely not about toxic positivity. This is about awareness, because there's a line between expressing what's real and turning negativity into a habit that shapes your mood, your mindset, and your relationships. And most of us cross that line far more often than we realize. If you find the information in this episode helpful, I invite you to press the like button and subscribe. This is a Karen Shaw podcast. I'm Karen Shaw. Let's get started. At its core, complaining is a form of communication about dissatisfaction. No surprise there. It's how we externalize discomfort, frustration, or unmet expectations. In that sense, complaining isn't inherently bad. It's human, and often it's an attempt at emotional regulation. When we complain, we're usually trying to release internal pressure. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as cognitive offloading, moving mental and emotional weight out of the mind and into language. Saying something out loud can create a brief sense of relief. We've all experienced this. The body registered that something has been expressed, that it has been heard. But relief is not the same as resolution. Venting can lower emotional tension in the moment, but it does not necessarily change the source of that tension. And when venting becomes the goal instead of clarity or change, the brain quietly learns that repeating the complaint is a solution, even when it isn't. Complaining also plays a social role. It can function as a form of bonding, right? When we gripe with someone about the weather, traffic, work, or daily frustrations, we're often seeking validation and connection. Shared dissatisfaction can feel like alignment. We're sticking on with this together. It signals you see what I see. The problem is that the brain doesn't separate bonding from belief. When connection consistently forms around complaint, we don't just feel closer to others, we reinforce a shared lens of dissatisfaction. There's also an important distinction to make here. Not all complaining is the same. Psychologists differentiate between instrumental complaining and habitual complaining. Instrumental complaining is purposeful. It names a legitimate issue with the intention of problem solving, boundary setting, or improvement. This kind of complaint is necessary. It's how systems change and relationships stay healthy. Habitual complaining, on the other hand, is repetitive venting without movement toward resolution. Instrumental complaining moves towards action. Habitual complaining circles the same emotional block and calls it expression. This distinction matters because complaining doesn't just describe our experience. Over time, it conditions it. Linguists and communication researchers have found that roughly 15 to 20% of everyday conversation involves some form of complaint, mild grumbling, venting, or expressions of dissatisfaction. I think that's a lot. Not dramatic whining, but just ordinary commentary on what's wrong. The average adult speaks somewhere between 12 and 16,000 words a day. That means roughly 2,000 to 3,000 words every single day are spent reinforcing dissatisfaction. That's not neutral. That's training. The brain learns through repetition, not intention. It doesn't care whether we mean to be negative. It tracks what we practice. Every repeated complaint strengthens neural pathways that prioritize threat, frustration, and deficiency. Over time, attention becomes what's trained to scan for what's wrong. Not because life has worsened, but because the brain has learned that this is what matters. When repetition combines with the brain's natural negativity bias, something subtle happens. We don't just notice problems more, we begin to expect them. And expectation quietly shapes experience. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Early humans relied on vocal signals to alert the group to danger, unfairness, or imbalance. Complaining helped mobilize attention and resources. It supported survival and social order. Anthropologists note that early communal groups depended on feedback, including complaint, to maintain cooperation and fairness. Complaint has always had a place in human history. In the book of Job, complaint became a confrontation with suffering and meaning. In classical Greek tragedy, lamentation serves catharsis and moral inquiry. During the Enlightenment, political complaint became the seed of reform, turning grievance into social progress. But tools that once served survival can malfunction in modern environments. What helped small tribes adapt can overwhelm us in a world of constant stimulation, constant commentary, and constant comparison. This brings us to the relationship between gratitude and complaint. If gratitude is about appreciating what is present and meaningful, complaining is about noticing what feels wrong or missing. Both are forms of awareness, but they orientate attention in the opposite directions. An authentic gratitude practice doesn't deny what's hard. It simply refuses to let what's wrong become the loudest voice in the room. Complaint can coexist with gratitude when it is mindful, purposeful, and finite. When it clarifies values, initiates change, and then gives way to action. But when complaint becomes habitual, unfocused, and endless, it reshapes perception rather than resolving problems. Despite knowing this, we keep complaining. Part of the reason is neural habit. Repetition strengthens pathways, making future complaints more automatic. Another reason is social reinforcement. People often unconsciously reward shared negativity. Psychologists call this co-rumination. We're ruminating together, bonding through repeated focus on problems, without movement towards solutions. We've all experienced this. And for many people, complaint becomes a substitute for agency. When actual control feels absent, talking about what's wrong can feel like action, but most of the time it's motion without movement. The hopeful part is this. The same brain that learned these patterns through repetition can learn something else. The moment you begin noticing your words, you've already interrupted the loop. Awareness is not passive. It is the first act of retraining. Psychologists have been studying complaining for decades, and one of the foundational voices in this area is researcher Robin Kowalski. Her work shows that complaining isn't one single behavior, it serves different purposes. Some complaining is instrumental, meaning it's intended to fix something or create change. Some complaining is expressive, meaning it's emotional release, a way to feel better in the moment. And then there's that habitual complaining, which repeats the same frustrations over and over without movement toward resolution. This is where things begin to shift. Complaining often starts as communication, but it can quietly turn into conditioning. When the brain learns that complaining brings relief, validation, or attention, it begins to default to it, even when it no longer helps. Complaining feels good for a moment because it activates reward and stress systems at the same time. When you complain, your brain releases small hits of dopamine, the neurotransmitter linked to reward and anticipation. Venting creates the illusion of control, even if nothing actually changes, and that brief relief reinforces the behavior. It's the same mechanism behind checking your phone, gossiping, or stress eating, temporary relief with a very long-term cost. Complaining also activates social bonding chemistry. When someone responds with agreement, your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. That shared frustration feels connecting. But over time, bonding through negativity can quietly turn into collective cynicism. Complaining also directs attention inward. It says, notice me, hear me, validate my experience. In small doses, that's human. In chronic doses, it can become an identity organized around grievance. This is why complaining is so sticky. It rewards the brain without resolving the problem. Neuroscience helps explain why habitual complaining changes how we feel and think. The brain has a built-in negativity bias. It's wired to notice problems because survival once depended on it. Complaining activates this threat system again and again. When we complain repeatedly, we strengthen neural pathways linked to rumination and self-focused thinking. Over time, the brain becomes more efficient at spotting what's wrong and less sensitive to what's working. Complaining also triggers cortisol, the stress hormone. Occasional stress is not harmful, but chronic stress is. Elevated cortisol over time interferes with memory, emotional regulation, and clear decision-making. This is why chronic complaining doesn't just make you feel grumpy, it changes how your brain operates. The brain doesn't distinguish between valid frustration and habitual rehearsal. It only tracks repetition. This is where gratitude comes in, not as positivity, but as regulation. Research by Robert Emmons and others show that gratitude works as a replacement behavior for complaint, not because it denies difficulty, but because it interrupts rumination. Gratitude shifts attention from threat to meaning, from lack to presence, from reaction to choice. Studies consistently show that gratitude strengthens emotional regulation, improves resilience, deepens relationships, and reduces stress responses. Neurologically, it activates reward pathways without the cortisol spike that complaining produces. In simple terms, complaining externalizes dissatisfaction, gratitude metabolizes it. They both begin with awareness, but they train the brain in opposite directions. If complaining costs us this much, why do we keep doing it? Because habits form faster than insight. Each complaint strengthens a familiar neural loop. Social environments often reward shared negativity. We all know this when we all get together with people, right? And when people feel powerless, complaining can feel like action even when it isn't. But most of the time it's motion, again, without movement. Here's the hopeful truth. Neuroplasticity works both ways. The same brain that learned to complain through repetition can learn something else. And the moment you pause, even briefly before complaining, you create space for choice. This is why a complaint-free challenge works. Not because complaints are bad, but because awareness interrupts automation. For 7 days, you're not trying to be perfect. You're training attention. You notice the urge, you pause the loop, and you choose differently. Sometimes that choice is gratitude, sometimes curiosity, sometimes silence, and again, sometimes it will be a complaint. But those other choices are enough to begin retraining the brain. So how do we begin to break this complaint habit? This is where it becomes practical. Not complicated, not overwhelming, just very intentional. One of the most powerful tools is something I call minding the gap. That split second before you speak is a sweet spot. It's the moment where awareness lives. Train yourself to pause. even for one breath before reacting. That pause gives your brain time to choose instead of going to default. Another practice is holding your tongue gently. We know the saying, bite the tongue, right? If what you're about to say doesn't inform, uplift, or move something forward, consider letting it pass. This isn't repression, it's restraint. Silence can be a power move when it's chosen consciously. Journaling before you vent is another simple shift. When something's bothering you, write it down first. Give it shape. Ask yourself, is this something I truly need to express or something I just want to offload? Writing helps separate insight from impulse. Listening more than you speak is also key. Sometimes what we think is conversation is really just trading complaints. When you listen without echoing negativity, you rewire the brain for empathy instead of reactivity. And finally, reframe without suppressing. Instead of saying this is so unfair, try asking, what can I learn here, or what do I need to do next? That simple shift moves you from stuck to strategic. And now, here's your invitation. For the next 7 days, I challenge you to step into the complaint-free zone. This isn't about being positive, it's about being aware. When you catch yourself about to complain, notice it. That alone, remember, is power. Pause before it leaves your lips. Take a breath, then choose. Ask yourself, do I need to share this or can I shift it? Keep track of it, not with guilt, but with curiosity. Check out what you're doing. Each time you catch yourself, make a mental note and then flip it. Find one thing you're grateful for or curious about in that same moment. At the end of 7 days, reflect. How did it feel? What surprised you? Did you speak less, think differently, feel more clear? This isn't about perfection. You're not trying to become a monk in a week. You're simply practicing intentional speech. So let me leave you with this. Complaining is easy. Gratitude takes courage. One keeps you stuck, the other helps you grow. If the words you speak are the house you live in, would you want to live there? And hey, if you know someone who could benefit from this information, please share. And if you found it useful, please like and subscribe. We aim not to disappoint or to waste your time here. Thanks for tuning in to the Karen Shaw Podcast. I'm Karen Shaw. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.